This is part of our series of topics that we have for schools and for parents to listen to. And at any time, they can actually look into it or share it. So schools can share it with parents. Advocates that work with parents can share it with parents. Parents can share it with other parents. And then school people can also have access to this. It's a wonderful way to share information about the wonderful programs we have in our state. Dr. Gretchen Cole-Lade works at Able Tech, which is a sister program to us, but she has valuable information, and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself. So Gretchen, take the floor.
Thanks so very much, Joanne. I'm so glad to be here, and thank you all for making time to share time with us to learn more about assistive technology in the classroom. I guess I'm supposed to say I'm a previous special ed teacher. I feel like I need to say I'm an old special ed teacher. I taught for 15 years here at Enid. At Enid High School, I taught students with severe disabilities and used assistive technology for the entire time that I was in the classroom. I then moved up to higher ed, and I taught in the early childhood education department at Oklahoma State University. I smilingly say I was their special ed representative to remind them of how to meet all children's needs in inclusive classrooms, which of course included assistive technology. And then in 2021, I moved over to Able Tech, which I feel like was a completion of the circle. I started using AT in my classroom. I used Oklahoma Able Tech resources the entire time I taught at Enid High. And then Allison Robinson, our assistant director, and I worked on longitudinal studies involving AT with young children in the child development lab while I was teaching at in the early childhood department. And then finally now I'm at Able Tech. And as the training specialist, I provide trainings primarily for educators all across Oklahoma. And so let me teach you a little bit about Able Tech and about how assistive technology can be used effectively to support children in the classroom. All right, so let's get started. All right, let's first talk about Able Tech's mission. Able Tech's mission is to improve the lives of all Oklahomans by providing AT devices and services, financing opportunities, digital accessibility services, advocacy, and education. Is that a mouthful or what? First of all, realize that Able Tech's mission is to support the lives of all Oklahomans. So when I first started working at Able Tech, I heard someone describe our age range as being, we serve people from womb to tomb. And I thought, well, that's not very positive. And then I went to a workshop and heard someone say, Able Tech supports people from twinkles to wrinkles. And I like that so much better. So we serve from birth all the way through. My favorite person right now that I'm providing assistance to is a woman who called, and she needs some magnification. She's developing vision problems. And what I loved about her is I said, she told me, she said, this was in February. She said, at the end of February, she said, my birthday is February 29th. And so I kind of smiled and I said, oh my goodness, so you only have a birthday every 4 years? And she said, yes. And I said, can I ask you how old you are? And she said, she's 24. And so doing the math, you can see that that's at first amazing that she only now needs magnification. But so realize that Able Tech, while we absolutely serve our 3-year-olds through 22, we also provide services to individuals of all ages. And when you look at the list of services that we provide, we have financing opportunities for families who need help with low interest loans to be able to afford assistive technology. I love our digital accessibility services. They just put on a fabulous workshop teaching people how to make documents accessible for all individuals. Certainly we teach advocacy. And then of course, my true area, my true wheelhouse is education. So realize that within AbleTech is the AT ACT program here in Oklahoma. We're federally funded through the Administration for Community Living out of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Realize that there is an AT ACT program in every state and territory across the United States to support individuals with disabilities. And what I love about the final bullet is the very last two words, that we are consumer responsive. Right now, I'm doing investigations into an ORCAM. We have an older version of ORCAM, but we are definitely, we always want to have the most current ones in our inventory. And so, and the reason why I'm looking into it is because a consumer contact, a parent of a child contacted me just today. And so I'm doing research into that. And so that's what I love about working at AbleTech, is that we are truly, truly consumer responsive. While AbleTech is based out of OSU's campus in Payne County, we serve the entire state. What I love to tell people is that truly we'll go all the way out to Cimarron County. We'll go down to Choctaw. We will go wherever we're needed. Now, the best part is, you know, we live in a digital world. So a lot of times we can Zoom to save that, what I call Oklahoma processing time in the car. So, and realize that too, just that we are based out of OSU. About a third of the AT ACT programs across the United States are based out of university settings, but we serve the entire state. So let's talk about what AT is and what the definition is. Realize that the definition of assistive technology actually has two prongs. The first is the devices, and the second are the services. And so AT, what is AT? AT is anything that can help a person with a disability, and I love this, do a task easy or better, faster, or more efficiently than might otherwise be difficult or impossible to do without it. In 1991, in the IBM training manual, so this dates back pretty far away in the history of computers, the IBM manual in 1991 has two sentences that I actually quoted in my dissertation. And the first one says, technology for individuals without disabilities makes life easier. And it absolutely does, doesn't it? What would we do without our phones right now? Recently, I was driving I live in Enid. I was driving to Oklahoma City to do a boot camp for OKC public schools. And they closed I-35, a section of I-35. I think that should be illegal for people who don't have phones and Google Maps. But so they closed the highway. And so I had to get off when according to my map, I should have gone straight. Well, thank goodness my map just rerouted, was very polite about it, and got me to the school with no problem. Absolutely, technology makes our life easier. However, the second sentence I think is so meaningful, because in the IBM training manual, the second sentence says, technology for individuals with disabilities makes life possible. And so that's what I love about working at AbleTech. And that's what I loved about teaching students and using AT, is I literally got to sit back and watch how AT can make life possible. It can make life possible in school. It can make life possible in daily living. It can make life possible for individuals. And then realize that within the definition of assistive technology, there are three levels of technology. There's low tech, mid tech, and high tech. I'm going to show you some devices in a little bit, and you'll see the difference between our low tech, mid tech, and high tech. In my little perspective, when I think of low tech, I think no batteries. All right. Once we move up into mid tech, we certainly have batteries, and high tech, we really go into the digital area with that. But realize that when we start looking at assistive technology as educators, really we should start with low tech. Is there a low tech device? Because of course, one of the things that we need to think about is that low tech also, generally speaking, means that technology is less expensive. And certainly in a world where funding is always a question, we need to be able to start with low tech. My favorite story is there was a gentleman that I met at OUHSC many years ago who used a wheelchair for mobility. He had spastic cerebral palsy, and so limited range of motions with his arms. And he loved Dr. Pepper. And on his wheelchair, he had a spot for the Dr. Pepper. And he wanted to be able to open his Dr. Pepper independently and struggled with the fine motor strength required. And so he was able to get a paint can opener from Lowe's. Well, those are free. And he tied it onto his wheelchair. And so he would be able to open his Dr. Pepper independently. Talk about dignity, that he was able to independently get his drink open, and it didn't cost anything. Just as meaningful of a piece of AT equipment as something that costs way more than that. And so, so realize that. I promise you I'll share a little bit of all of them when I talk about the different categories. The next section, though, the next part of the definition is AT services. And this is where I think as educators, we live in a world of Google, don't we? I can Google, AT devices for vision, AT devices for speech, and I will see a ton of options for each of the categories. However, that doesn't mean I know how to use it, does it? And so what I love about AbleTech is that along with providing devices to loan out, we also provide AT services. And so AT services directly assist an individual with a disability or you as an educator to be able to select, acquire, and use the AT device. And so we very frequently get calls from teachers. Just got a call from a teacher who's borrowing what's called a Braille note taker, and she wanted to disable one of the functions. Well, because it was interfering with the student's learning. Well, we did tons of work with the manufacturer and with the teacher, and discovered that no, maybe there's a better device out there for the student to use. And so the student is now using a different device or trialing a different device. So realize that is what Oklahoma AbleTech also provides, our AT services. I'm not going to read all of the myths and misconceptions. You all can download the PowerPoint, but I do want to touch on a couple of things. First, number one, we in special ed, I know that I talk to the choir when I talk about fairness, that fairness is not that everyone gets the same thing. Fairness is everyone gets what they need. And so AT is not an unfair advantage. And whenever I teach teachers about AT, one of the things I emphasize is the moment you bring in a piece of assistive tech device into your classroom or into your therapy session, if there are other children around, they're all going to want to interact with it. And so plan on that. That doesn't mean that they're going to continue to. We truly, and this is where I would ask, if we were all in person, I would ask us, how many of us love sour balls? In a classroom of 20 people, I might get 2 or 3 that raise their hand that they love sour balls. Well, I had a student with autism who, have y'all ever taught a student who never stops talking? And he had lots to say, and most of it was off topic, but interesting. And so, however, to get him to focus, he needed sour balls. And so I brought in sour balls, and you know what? The very first, and I'm telling you, when he had a sour ball in his mouth, he stopped talking. He was silent and he could focus. And so when I brought them in, though, oh my goodness, lots of kids in my classroom wanted the sour balls. I allowed everybody to have one if they needed it. Again, if you have an AT device in your room, allow students to be able to sit on the flexible seating that's available, to use the AT mouse that you've brought in. But you know what I found consistently was if they did not need it, they stopped asking to use it. Okay. And so AT provides, and bottom line, it levels the playing field. Let me look too. Okay. Number 5, that students with disabilities should use AT for everything. Absolutely not. This is where, we'll talk about assistive tech evaluations in a minute, that this is where we need to figure out what AT do they need to be successful to meet their general education goals. And once we determine that, then that's what they need it for. Number 6, I've already talked about that it's all high tech. No, it's not. Number 7, I think, is so important. What works well for one student will work well for other students. Absolutely not. And one of the best things that I think ever happened to me is that I watched a documentary called Wretches and Jabberers. Again, it's called Wretches and Jabberers. It's a story about 2 gentlemen, Tracy and Larry, who are both diagnosed with severe autism. They are for the most part nonverbal and were raised without a communication device, finally got a communication device. Now it's called facilitated communication, and there are some controversies over it, but they both use it quite successfully. Well, how it works is they have a keyboard and they type in their what they want to say, and then they hit speak or hit a button and it will speak for them. So it is text to speech. And I attended several workshops where they were key speakers. And what they had up on the board, now they had their presentation already pre-programmed, but then they took questions from the crowd and then they would type their answers. And so we got to see the keyboard, what they were typing was projected up on a screen. And what I noticed was neither Larry nor Tracy used the word prediction feature, which is an AT feature of our text to speech. And I thought, oh, that it took me a little bit of time to get up the courage to ask them the question, but I finally did. I said, why do you all not use the word prediction feature? Because I use it all the time. I don't know if you all do, but I use it all the time. And Larry wrote and said, word prediction slows me down because it causes me to have to pause and think too long. And I thought, oh, this is where you need to get to know your students. They disabled the word prediction part of their keyboard so that way it wouldn't slow them down. And then finally, number 8, if you have universal design for learning, you don't need AT. And one of the key things that I hope you will always remember is that with UDL is for everyone. UDL is a perfect example of just universal design are the curb cutouts that almost every place has nowadays. Now, who's going to use that curb cut? Well, it could be a person using a wheelchair for mobility. It could also be a mom with a stroller, someone on a skateboard. The universal design allows for everyone. Same for universal design for learning. Rob was so kind to make the PowerPoint available to you all. It's up on the screen. We have a closed captioner. Now, we don't, sitting where we are right now, know which one of these you're going to use or which one you would prefer to use to process this particular webinar. However, we make it available to you. That's universal design for learning. What assistive technology is for the individual student. So realize that, and I admire Joanne and Rob so very much professionally. If I were to wind the clock back, I would have become a special ed attorney, mainly because when I was teaching, I so frequently would hear from others, well, where is that written that we have to do that? And I think what is so important in our field is that we need to know that there are laws that number one, assistive technology is a great idea, absolutely positively to use in your classroom to support students. However, it's also the law. And so when someone pushes back, that's where we need to have the background to say, wait a minute, there are actually 4 primary laws that impact AT in the educational setting. So let's go through them real quickly. The first I've already talked a little bit about. It's the AT Act program. It was written by or put into law, federal law in 2004. And bottom line, what it said is that every state and territory must have an organization that provides AT access and acquisition of AT. again, Able Tech is Oklahoma's AT Act program. A couple of years ago, I was flying back from DC and I met a family with, I had a foot injury. So I was in a wheelchair, and, you know, they always park at the airports, they always park everyone using a wheelchair for mobility next to each other. And I got parked next to a little 7-year-old young lady. And so I bent over and asked her what her name was and introduced myself. And at that point, I realized that she was nonverbal, and her mom began speaking for her and introduced us and introduced herself. And of course, you know, the AT person in me came out and said to the mom, you know, may I ask, does your daughter have a speech generating device? And she goes, oh no, I don't know what you're talking about. So then I said, you know, where are you from? Let me get you information about the AT Act program in your area. For Able Tech, now all of the AT Act programs have to have similar programs, but this is what we do, and that would benefit for teachers. First, we do demonstrations, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. Short-term loans, I'll talk about that a little more in a little bit. We also offer free, gently used, durable medical equipment and assistive technology. I mentioned the financing activities. What I really want to emphasize right now are our trainings. I am, again, the training specialist for Able Tech. We put on multiple trainings throughout the year, but our biggest push is we do a 3-part assistive tech evaluation training. I literally, in the 3 trainings, and the dates are already on our website. You'll see the website at the very end of our PowerPoint. If you go to it and go to AT Education Services, you'll find the dates. We're going to meet in September, October, and November. And what I basically do is I will walk any educator through how to consider, how to assess, how to implement, and then how to revisit assistive technology being used by a student within your schools. What we need to think about in trainings or in doing AT evaluations is this. When I was teaching, and again, I taught for 15 years, and I needed to do an AT evaluation on my student, one of the things that I realized very quickly is that I, as the teacher, and then my team that surrounded the student and worked with the student, and I include paraprofessionals in that, the OTs, PTs, speech and language pathologists. I would even include our PE teacher, and I would include our lunch ladies, because certainly our lunch ladies had interactions with our students. We would work together as a team to do an AT evaluation to determine if a student, and it depended on what the need was, again, you know, what the consideration was, the area of consideration. But if it was communication, and a lot of my students had communication challenges, then that was across the board from the time they got on the bus till they got off the bus. So now I need feedback from all of these people. And so I do trainings that teach teams how to do an evaluation. And, you know, one of the key parts of it is that in workshop 2, I will teach how to choose the features of an AT device before we even get to the device itself. And then we look at, oh man, out of the 10 possible features, boy, 8 of them meet the student's needs. Now, you can call in a professional AT evaluator to come into your classroom to do an AT evaluation. They can probably come up with those 8 features that a student could benefit from in a device. The challenge, though, is that they don't know the student well enough to know which of those 8 are so important. One of the case studies that we do in the training is we do a case study on a 9th grade young man with muscular dystrophy, and he is losing the ability to write. However, as a 9th grader, he still has to write papers, doesn't he? Essays and paragraphs. And so we factor it down, and what we come up with is that, you know, and what I love about teaching it is I let it occur almost organically through the teachers and educators that are in the trainings, because they'll come up with, well, wait a minute, speech to text where he would talk and the computer will record what he says works. But number one, it makes him stick out in a classroom, doesn't it? And we all know our students don't like to stick out. No one likes to stick out. And then number two, it's very difficult to be able to use speech to text in a loud classroom and have it work successfully and effectively. So do you see where by processing down the environment, you have to know the environment, you have to know the student and what the student brings to the classroom and how they want to be successful, but they also want to be like their peers. So we do lots of trainings. And so if you know of people that would be interested in starting next year with the knowledge of forming an AT evaluation team, please give them our information. The last thing that I want to say about trainings is this. By offering the AT evaluation trainings, we're addressing the Oklahoma State Department of Ed Policies and Procedures Handbook. Within that handbook, out of all of the different categories of disabilities that a student can be diagnosed in, realize that an AT evaluation, a formal AT evaluation, is required for any student who is deafblind, who is hearing impaired, to include deafness, who has multiple disabilities. Can you see where I had tons of AT evals that I did in my career because most of my students had multiple disabilities. If they have an orthopedic impairment, you must do a formalized AT evaluation. And then finally, of course, if they're visually impaired, you must also do one. And so teachers can't just say, oh, I think they might benefit, but I don't know how to do it. They need to take the next step and become trained. We do public awareness events about AT. Thank you, Rob and Joanne, for inviting me today. This is a perfect example. We also do consultations, and I love consultations with teachers because it almost puts me back in the classroom because I get to talking with a teacher. And what happens is we have a consultation form on our website. It's on the very first main page. You click it, you write in what your concerns are, certainly keeping confidentiality issues in mind, but you will identify what are the areas of concern. And then what's great is it comes into our staff, and our staff then says, oh my gosh, we need a speech and language person to join in. We need an OT to join in. We need the teacher to join in. We need our hearing person to join in. And we form a team to then contact the educator. And it can be a teacher, it can be a parent, it can be an administrator, it can be certainly any one of our OTs, PTs, or speech and language pathologists, to then form a team, meet with the teacher either in person. We have had teachers come. I had a Sooner Start teacher come and meet me in our inventory room because she wanted to walk through our vision inventory. And what I absolutely loved, you can't see me right now, but I'm smiling big, it makes my cheeks hurt, is that she and I actually toured the whole room, because we all know that that different AT devices, even though they don't fall under vision, can still support a young child with vision impairment. And so we spent a lot of time in our rec leisure area with games. And so we do consultations. And then finally, the last one is that we do, like I said earlier, training on accessibility. And this, if a teacher has a concern, our ICT staff, we have 3 fabulous people that have formed an incredible team. What they do is, we had a teacher from one of the districts here in Oklahoma contact us because she had a student who had low vision and was having difficulty with accessible documents. And so our ICT team jumped in and helped the teacher figure out how the student, because this was a student who, even though we've moved back into in-person teaching, the student had not moved back yet because of health concerns, so was still on home-based instruction, which of course then really limits if he's not able to access what is required for the general ed curriculum. All right, so what we need to understand too with our second one is, of course, the IDEA. and certainly I'm talking to the choir today, aren't I? But realize that AT needs need to be looked at in the development of an IEP, the review, and then certainly the revision. We all know, I think, that schools are to provide AT if it's needed for FAPE, for a free and appropriate public education. I think maybe you all have heard in 2017, there was a Supreme Court case, the Andrew F. versus Douglas County, where Andrew was a 7-year-old young man with autism, and his parents questioned whether the school was doing enough for him. And it went to the Supreme Court, and there was a unanimous Supreme Court decision that said that we now must provide a free, and now listen, I think we now, instead of 1A, we have 2 A's in FAPE, a free and ambitiously appropriate public education. Assistive technology meets that particular part of the IDEA. A big part is that it cannot cost the parent anything. And so one of the things that Joanne and I were talking before we came on the webinar about funding, and that funding is always a question. When I first started teaching, I taught for the Department of Defense overseas. My husband was in the military, and so I was hired as a special ed teacher, a local hire. I never heard no when I asked for something from the Department of Defense schools. And then I moved to Oklahoma. Imagine the shell shock when I got here and asked where the supply room was, and was informed that actually the secretary's first words to me when I asked where the supply room was, she said, "You're not from around here, are you?" And I said, "Nope, you're right, I'm not." And so I learned how to, number one, work with my special ed director to get funding, but then I also became a grant writer. And in the 15 years that I taught at Enid High, I received over $50,000 worth of grants. Garth Brooks wrote me a big check. He never came to visit my classroom, even though we invited him every year. But we did meet him at a soccer game. His girls played soccer for Owasso, and they played Enid one day in Enid. And so we got to meet him and thank him in person. But so there are ways to get it funded. And so please know that, number one, I was asked by AbleTech to develop a funding workshop. It'll be in December. We haven't announced the date yet, but it'll be in December. And it basically, I'm dating myself here. I do a David Letterman top 10 things I learned about writing grants. But we also have AbleTech on our website under resources. I'm in charge of the funding guide. And so there are more funders listed on that guide than you have time to write grants for. And so I just worked with a family to give them ideas on how to get a device for their child based on our funding guide alone. Finally, one of the key points of the IDEA about assistive technology is that we cannot delay in the provision of the required AT. After we've done an AT evaluation, if we have determined that the student would benefit from, because an AT eval will show very clearly, is the student able to meet their general education objectives? And if they are, or at least they're moving towards it, then we need to get the AT into their classroom. Title II and the AT and assistive technology is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's basically a civil rights law, and that schools are underneath the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is where it's addressed within the auxiliary aids and services of the IEP. This one, though, truly, if you ever print up this PowerPoint, I would want you to circle, highlight, star, make bigger. This is huge within the Americans with Disabilities Act. It specifically addresses students with disabilities, and it states that students with disabilities must have communication that is as effective as communication with others without disabilities. Okay, what that means for us as teachers is this: we can't stop at just pictures. Pictures are great, absolutely, positively. They are our low-tech version of communication. One of my students who challenged me most to be a teacher was a 17-year-old young man who tested at a 9-month-old cognitive level. And so we used a lot of eye gaze, where I held up 2 pictures and asked him to make a choice. Every day for lunch, he had 2 choices. His mom wanted him to only have 2 choices. It was either pizza or a sandwich. And so we would hold 2 pictures up and ask him to choose which one. We were still, though, working on using, based on the Americans with Disabilities Act, we were working on him using what is called a speech generating device, an SGD. And that is something that you press a button, you press a screen, and it will speak for you. And so we were still working on that as well, but he was only able to, at that point, cognitively work with just one choice, hitting a one switch. They're called Big Macs. They're round and they have one message. We were still working on that as well. So do you see where for a student with those limitations, we were still able to help him communicate using low tech, and then we moved up to mid tech as well. And I will tell you that by the time I left, he was using the one message successfully, and we were beginning to move to 2. Certainly Section 504 is an area where we're all aware of it, but sometimes it can be really a vague mandate. But understand that students may qualify for 504 even without qualifying for special ed. We still must provide equal access, and that AT can be located within the 504 under supplementary aids and services. Bottom line, I would hope that if a student ever needed assistive technology to be successful in a classroom, regardless of whether they're on an IEP or a 504, that we would go out of our way to make sure they had it. So real quickly, I'm going to walk us through. There are 10 different categories of assistive technology. Now, realize that much like I said with the Sooner Start teacher that came in to meet with me about vision, we can arm wrestle about whether is it computer access or is it speech communication. We can argue about that. And so my key thing is, number one, the only time I will engage truly in a debate is with high school students who are transitioning. They really like to debate, and so I will debate with them. But what I would encourage you all to do is, if you're looking for a device on our AT Discovery page, and I'm going to give you the web link on in a little bit on our PowerPoint, then what I would like you to do is put in underneath at the top, it will say the category, and instead of putting computer access, put all. And then the search engine will search all 10 categories, so that way you will come up with things maybe from multiple different categories. But so we have computer access, vision, hearing, learning, cognition, and development. That's our teaching one. So it's a huge category. Daily living, speech communication, seating, positioning, and mobility. This is where I kind of plant my flag professionally. My experience, absolutely, positively. And in fact, if you look at the pictures on the very bottom of the young lady in the red, all the way over to the young man using a forehead switch, if you do not have your students seated and positioned in such a way that they can access either the assistive technology or the activity, nothing else is going to be successful. And so number 7 is a really important category. And then certainly mobility. Number 8 is environmental adaptations. 9 is the rec, sports, and leisure. While I always joke that my students went to PE and that was called my plan period. I absolutely positively don't like to sweat. And so I was really happy for them to go. However, that did not mean that that's where I stopped as a teacher. I would go into PE and observe and do AT evaluations there, so that way I wanted my students up off the bench. I want them actively participating. And so my favorite story real quickly about rec, sports, and leisure is that I had a student who was cortically blind, and she took gold in Special Olympics bocce, which is Italian lawn bowling. It's where you throw out a small ball onto a field, onto a section of a field. It's called a pallino, and you throw the pallino out, and then it's kind of a brutal game. I'm not competitive, can you tell? Where then each person rolls a larger ball and tries to get it as close as they can to the Polino, or they try to knock their opponent's ones off. Well, what was cool about this particular bocce game is that the Polino beeped. So my student could listen for it and then roll her ball towards it. She took gold. She's cortically blind and she took gold. It was one of those magical days as a special educator who loved AT. Finally, vehicle modifications. Most of our vehicle modifications we send out to our partners who have car repair shops to do them, but we do have a couple of things. And so let's take a look real quickly. For computer access, we have you name the mouse that is assistive tech, and we have it on the screen. You can see that I'm sharing with you the kid trackball. The kid trackball, what I love about it is the yellow ball is actually the cursor. And so the student does not need to have a large range of motion to move the cursor around. What I also love as a person who has left-right orientation challenges myself is that instead of saying left click, right click, you could say blue click, red click. Okay, now you have to know that the student recognizes the two colors. What's great is the green button on it is actually the copy. If you highlight a section, the green is the copy. For vision, we have lots of different magnifiers. This one is called a video mag. As you can see, it has a handle, the little blue handle that's off to the right. This is one that the student could hold over a page and magnify what the writing is on the page. And then you can also, if you take a look, you can change the green and yellow with the yellow in the center. You can change the color scheme so it can go from white to black. It can go from yellow to black. It can go from green to black. And so now certainly somebody using the video mag would need to have good fine motor control. We also have magnifiers that are tabletops. What I like, if they're able to use a video mag, can you see where features are so important? If they do have the fine motor abilities to use one, what I like about it is it can fit in their backpack, and so it's portable. A lot of the tabletop magnifiers weigh like 12 pounds, and so they're not going to be portable. With our hearing, certainly we have lots of different ways to amplify the sound of the teacher or amplify the sound of the small group speaking to the student. We have the Comfort Company does a whole lot. Comfort Duet is one. A key with hearing, if I can just kind of give you my point of view though, is that if you are using an amplification device that is UDL, that the teacher's using it and everyone is benefiting from it, you still need to have it in the IEP that student is not just benefiting from it, but requires it. So that way, if the system goes down, the system needs to be replaced. It isn't oh, well, we don't have the money, so, it's really okay. The kids will just get over it, or the teacher will talk louder. For learning, cognition, and development, I always share my absolute favorite. We have a C-Pen reader pen. What this one does, if you can see within the picture, is you run it over the written word and it will read the words back to you. It also has a dictionary feature, so it will tell you what the word means. I presented this and actually had the C-Pen reader at a university recently. I was teaching pre-service educators and I passed it around, and one of the young ladies is from China. She uses the C-Pen reader to define words and to also read them to her. So it's a fabulous device. Certainly daily living. I know we live in a world where the emphasis is academics. I recognize that up until, and now we're moving into 18 to 22-year-old. I'm so excited about what I think the future holds for those students. But so daily living though is still part of what we do as educators. My students would go to the lunchroom and boy, you want those lunchroom staff to be happy. And so we have built up handles for different silverware. What I love is we actually have a spoon that no matter how you orient your wrist, the spoon stays level. And so we have lots of different daily living devices to borrow. For speech communication, what I'm showing you right here is what I love about this page is, on the left side with daily living, those are low-tech devices. on the right, that is a mid-tech device where it is called a super talker. It has, I think this one has 8 different levels, so 8 different possible screens of choices of 8. Remember how I talked about my student who used the 1 choice? This is for a student who can handle up to 8. And you can put in several different statements that the student can use. Seating, positioning, and mobility. We've all certainly seen the yoga balls. However, sometimes we have kids with what are called proprioceptive needs. Those are the big muscle kids. I had a couple of kids like that in my lifetime of teaching. And yoga balls were not good because they would bounce almost to the ceiling and be very effective with it. And so the disco sit is kind of a mini ball that sits in the chair itself, still allows wiggling and small bounces, but keeps them safe. Environmental adaptations, weighted items, research indicates that weighted items sometimes can help students focus and settle. And so we have weighted lap pads that you can borrow. We have weighted vests that you can borrow. We have compression vests that you can borrow to help your students. With rec, sports, and leisure, I love this. I had several of these dice rollers in my classroom. You can see that it is attached with a yellow switch. There's also a little red button on the dice roller. If you have the fine motor coordination to press just the red button, it will roll the dice for you. But if your student doesn't have it and they need a switch, they can also, it is switch activated as well. This saves so much time and energy from chasing dice that have flown across the classroom. Finally, with the vehicle modifications, this is just a very low-tech, small vehicle modification where it helps children be able to unbuckle their seat belts. Now, I know what you're all thinking. I immediately go there too. Wow, there are kids we don't want unbuckling their seat belt. No, this would be kept up front and then handed back to the student. But think about the bus lines or the pickup lines. We need to be able to get kids in and out of cars quickly. And so we have one of those. And this is my favorite low-tech one. It's less than $10. All right, you can find all of these items on our AT Discovery page, and I have the link for it. And as you can see on the slide, it doesn't just give you information about it. It gives you videos, links, funding information, tips for how to use it. It's a fabulous, fabulous page, and we update it constantly. And if you find something else that you wish we had in our inventory, again, we're consumer responsive. Please talk with us. So I want to talk real quickly about device demonstrations. This is where we actually do demonstrations for you. Where if you say, I have this device I want to use, but I don't know how to use it. And I don't have time to read the manual, or I'm confused by the manual, or it scares me. It's really okay to say, sometimes we get scared by devices. And so we have staff that are available to do demonstrations. Again, we can do them in person now, thank goodness. We can also do them via Zoom. What we would do is if you want a demonstration, we'll send you the device. Almost every device that we have at least 2 of them in our inventory. And so if we have 2 in inventory, we send you one, we then Zoom together. And I will then show you how to use it on my end, you use it on your end. This is the most fabulous program we have for educators. It's a short-term loan program. You can borrow up to 3 devices at a time, and you can keep them for up to 6 weeks. What this allows you to do, remember how I said I received over $50,000 in grants? Most of my grants were for assistive technology. And the way I got them was I had borrowed them from AbleTech on the free short-term loans, trialed them, took pictures, took data on how the students used it, then wrote a grant and said, it's not just something I think will work, but let me show you how it is working, and we really need it in our classroom. People wrote checks. So how do you borrow? First, you establish an account. There's the link for it. And then you can borrow most of our devices for up to 6 weeks. Some of our speech communication devices are so popular that we ask that you return them in 4, but for the most part, it's 6 weeks. Certainly, we're coming up on the end of the school year. I would wait until August, or actually probably September, once you get to know your kids, know the activities that you need to know. Realize that whenever I train on what is called the SETT format. It is SETT, student, environment, task, and then tool. And so you need to get to know the student, what environment they're going to be in, and the task that is being asked of them at that point. But here's the link. And then you will be able to, again, borrow up to 3. If the device is already being loaned out, you will then go on a waiting list. Still request it, and you'll go on a waiting list. Again, I talked a little bit earlier about our information and our consultation and our continuing education. I've given you the link to the consultation form. However, what's great about it is that now it's on our main page of our website, so that way you can go straight to it and fill it out, and then we can start helping you with brainstorming up ideas for students. Recently, we had a teacher who was teaching a student with multiple disabilities, and he was really at a loss. And so we formed a team and we met with him. We gave him so many ideas that we blew through the 3 devices. So we said to him, knowing your student, and again, this goes back to my emphasis on the trainings, that individuals that are in the classroom are the experts on their students. And so in his case, one of his goals was to start, the student had pretty significant cognitive delays. And so we talked about how he wanted to start using switches. So a switch activated device to turn something on. He wanted to teach, this was a young child, he wanted to teach cause and effect. I press this, this happens. And so we were talking about, oh my gosh, we have tons of cause and effect switches and items that the student could interact with. But then as we questioned him, the question became, what will motivate the student to use it? And he, bottom line, came down with music. And so that helped us. Can you see how important it is that the teacher is involved in the evaluation, in creating the evaluation? Because he could have used all kinds of different devices like toys, or the dice, and play a game. But for this student, the student would learn cause and effect very quickly if they used music, because it was a motivator. And so it was a fabulous consultation, and he was able to come in and not come in, but use our short-term loan program based on the consultation. And so what I hope for all of you is that you will leave this workshop, this webinar, and go out and share the information with your teams, with people that you know that would benefit from knowing about, number one, Able Tech as a resource, but then also about assistive technology and the importance of evaluations being done by teachers who know their students. And then finally, again, we have our funding guide. We have both public and private funder sources listed. And now, as a teacher, one of the things we need to realize with our funding guide is that there are 3 different pretty much categories that are identified in the write-ups. Number 1, of course, is age. And so as you go through it, it can be overwhelming. And we're now trying to sort it. We have the private funding sources sorted into categories. So if you're looking for learning, cognition, and development, they're all in one category now. However, so going into learning, cognition, and development, that's going to be probably birth, because we also serve, our birth to 3 sooner start kiddos. So birth to 22. But if your student has a hearing impairment, you may also want to look in the hearing funders. Now, when you go over to any of the others, realize that age will be a factor. We have several funders that fund AT devices for individuals with Alzheimer's. Okay, as a teacher, you aren't going to use that particular fund. You're not going to click on that funder. However, if you know and love somebody, or know someone who knows and loves someone with Alzheimer's, can you see where you need to share that information? please get the word out. You know, one of, I think, the saddest things that we sometimes say at Able Tech is that we are one of the best kept secrets in Oklahoma. We don't want to be a best kept secret. And so please do that. So age is one, disability is another. The only caveat to that is that United Cerebral Palsy still funds people or students without CP. Okay. And so, but otherwise, if it specifically says this is for students with, or for individuals with muscular dystrophy, don't try to write a grant. One of the things that I share in my grant writing workshop is, you know your grantor, get to know your grantor. Funny story, Bluebell ice cream. I was a finalist for Oklahoma Teacher of the Year in one of my 15 years. And so I was one of the top 12 teachers in Oklahoma. Believe it or not, Bluebell ice cream comes to the finalist schools with this big old truck, and they give out free ice cream sandwiches to all the students. And so I wrote a letter to Bluebell's owner to say, thank you so much for the 1,500 ice cream sandwiches that they brought to Enid High on a hot day in the fall. And the owner wrote me back and said, oh my gosh, thank you for thanking me. And so, you know what? I was like, oh, hey, you know, do you guys have a grant program? And he was like, only in Texas. Okay. So, so then, you know, that wasn't going to work. So you need to fit into whatever category. And then finally, income is our third one. Luckily for teachers that work at public schools, you pretty much qualify for just about every grant out there. Income, whenever I talk about it here, when I'm referring to the funding guide, really means more for the families that are applying for individual grants. And so sometimes their income will come into be a factor. So, all right, now I will turn it over to, you know what? I finished with 2 minutes to spare, Rob. How, boy, am I good or what? And first, can I also thank so much the captioner, Yancey? I appreciate you so very much. And I apologize for how fast I talk. I was raised on the East Coast. And so I've been told that people sometimes recognize that because I do talk so fast. So thank you, Yancey, for your closed captioning. So I'll turn it over, and if we have any questions or comments.
Are there any questions that someone would like to enter in the Q&A or the chat?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I would like to tell everyone, if you would like to register for the next webinar that we have, Rob has entered that registration. Sorry, I'm getting over a little thing. And he will be doing a implementation of our program at CERC, where he's starting to do an IEP facilitation at the district level.
Oh,
and
nice.
if there'd be anybody who interested in knowing what that's about, you may be interested in the webinar. Any questions? I've given you a few minutes. Gretchen's given us some fabulous websites to visit and some information. I have one question. What was the name of that video? Wretches and
Jabberers. Joanne,
Jabberers.
Jabberers. Okay. And I'll tell you the little history behind the title is that Tracy and Larry came up with the name of the webinar or of the documentary. And it's because when they were growing up, their outward behaviors were indicative of someone who was not intellectually and cognitively very high. And so people, they said, they both said that they were referred to as wretches. They're older men. And so, you know, I hope we've moved long past that. But they refer to us as jabberers, that we talk so much. Where they hold off, and what they say is incredibly meaningful. And so basically what the documentary did is it followed them around and truly across the world, finding other people who were very similar to them. They're absolutely fabulous. I almost became a groupie at conferences anytime I would see them on. I went to everything they ever presented because we learned so much from individuals who walk the walk.
Yeah, videos like that can be very powerful for other
Yes.
families to see, to help
Yes.
understand their own children. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think too that, I actually watched it at a time where I had a student with very similar behaviors, and we had not found the communication device yet. And so it re-energized me to continue to look for ways to help him, because the two of them Larry's so funny because at one point he was on a panel and it ran long, and he literally typed into his communication device, "Hey, look, I'm tired of sitting. If you want to talk to me, come to the bar. I'm going for a beer." And he got up and left. And it was
That's
delightful.
funny.
And probably like 5 people followed him. And
Uh-huh.
so yeah, it is just like you said, a very impactful.
Yeah, that's great. Well, here's Gretchen's information, and Able Tech is always happy to get questions and from parents wanting to know more information as well as teachers. So we thank you, Gretchen, for being here today. And
Absolutely.
I don't see any questions, so I say that this is a sign off.
All right.
Thank you for
Okay.
attending.
Thank you all.